Hi, I'm your Scream Queen Poppy and welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about a film called The Substance, which came out in 2024. It's 140 minutes long and it is rated an 18, so just be cautious. Some trigger warnings for this film include violence, injury detail, threats, nudity and body horror. A lot of body horror. A quick summary for this film. A renowned TV aerobics instructor faces a devastating blow on her 50th birthday as her boss fires her. Amid her distress, a laboratory offers her a substance which promises to turn her into the most enhanced version of herself. This is a French film and it was written and directed by Caroline Fargier. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Some notable cast mentions include Demi Moore, who is in Ghost from 1990. Then we have Margaret Qualley, who is in Poor Things from 2023. And we also have Dennis Quaid, who is in The Day After Tomorrow from 2004. At the time of filming, the box office for this film was quite a large $32.3 million. So let's talk about the plot for this film. So we open and are introduced to our main character, Elizabeth Sparkle, who is a Hollywood washed-up TV personality. On her 50th birthday, her producer Harvey takes her for a meal and fires her from her TV aerobics show, claiming this is due to her age. On her way home from the meeting, she's distracted by a man who's taking down a billboard from one of her shows and ends up getting into quite a major traffic collision. At the hospital, she breaks down and one of the young male nurses hands her a USB, telling her she seems like a suitable candidate, but for what she doesn't know. She goes home and bins the USB, but in her desperation, a couple of days later, she fishes the USB out of the trash and watches it. The USB has a video which is advertising something called The Substance. The Substance is a serum which creates a more beautiful, younger, more enhanced version of yourself. Deciding to try it, she phones the number and places an order. On the day of collection, she goes down a dark alley into this almost like warehouse, and there's a room with boxes, like lockers that you get post sent to. She collects the package from the drop box, taking it home, and she unboxes everything. Reading the instructions, she takes out the activator serum. This is a single-use injection, and this is what creates the other version of yourself, the younger, more beautiful, more perfect version of yourself. So she injects the serum and goes through this almost transformation phase where she is in agony, writhing. Then she collapses. When she wakes up, she can see herself lying naked on the bathroom floor with a massive slit down her back from the base of her neck all the way along her spine down to her tailbone. It literally looks like something has ripped her back open. The way the substance works is that it creates a symbiotic relationship between that body and her new body, the one she's created by taking the serum. The user must transfer their consciousness every 7 days without fail, no more, no less. And she'll bounce between the bodies, being active in one while the other remains in an unconscious state until it's ready for use. The active self requires daily injections of stabilizer fluid. This is extracted from the original body via a lumbar puncture, and this is what helps to prevent the younger body from deteriorating. So you take a week's worth at once, and then you've got a week's worth of daily injections before you then move back to the older body for a week. Elizabeth's younger self renames herself Sue, and she interviews for Elizabeth's former position. They eagerly hire the young and beautiful Sue as her replacement, and her new show becomes a hit. She skyrockets to fame almost instantly and has a newfound love and appreciation for this younger body that the substance has helped her create. At first, she obeys the rules and she does a week on and a week off. But one week, while she's living as Sue, she ends up hooking up with a guy, and as they're hooking up, her body begins to deteriorate because she hasn't had another dose of the fluid. She's meant to have gone back to her older self. So Sue doesn't see the harm and she takes one more dose of the daily stabilizer from Elizabeth. The next day, when Elizabeth returns to consciousness, one of her fingers has aged decades. I'm talking she's got this wrinkly 100-year-old woman finger. It's not pretty. She calls the supplier of the substance and explains, and they tell her that she absolutely must not surpass the 7-day deadline because it causes irreversible harm to the body. They also tell her that it's a combined consciousness, so she just needs to rein herself in. She just needs to sort herself out and stick to the rules and everything will be fine. But despite being a single consciousness, Both personas view themselves as different people to each other, and this quickly escalates into them despising one another as two separate entities. As Sue's popularity grows, she becomes greedy and starts taking more and more time from Elizabeth so that she can live as Sue for longer periods of time. Sue is confident and she's enjoying a hedonistic lifestyle of fame and luxury. Meanwhile, Elizabeth is becoming an insecure recluse who is aging rapidly due to Sue's poor decision making because she's living such a vapid and busy life. So this also makes them resent each other even more. Elizabeth is jealous of her younger self, of the beauty and the success, and she resents Sue's disregard for the switching schedule. On the other side, we have Sue, who's completely appalled with Elizabeth's self-loathing and binge eating. After a particularly self-destructive episode, Elizabeth destroys her whole apartment, wrecks the kitchen, food everywhere. And this also causes Sue to cause a bit of a commotion when she then goes to film one of her upcoming episodes. While filming, the camera zooms in on her booty and something is shown bulging from under the skin on her rear. It's protruding out horrifically, and this I think is where we see the beginning of all the body horror in this film, which there's going to be a lot of it. She runs off to her dressing room and hides, moving the object with her fingers up her thigh, across her stomach, to her belly button, and she reaches in really grotesquely into her belly button, really deep, and pulls out a huge chicken drumstick. After this, Sue decides she no longer wants to switch back and be Elizabeth anymore. She wants to live as Sue permanently. In order to do this, she starts hoarding glass jars and she extracts a heinous amount of the fluid from Elizabeth's spine. And she's using the same swollen, pus-filled hole, the puncture hole, to extract it. And this is a very grotesque scene. Sue gets a fantastic opportunity to host the year's biggest event. She's been asked to do the live telecast of the New Year's countdown. 3 months later, on the day of the filming of this New Year's telecast, she realises she's out of the fluid. She tries to take more from Elizabeth, but she is dry, she is empty. She calls the supplier and they tell her that the only way to replenish this fluid is to transfer back and live as Elizabeth and let the fluid naturally rebuild. Sorry if you heard that, my cat's got the zoomies. When they switch, Elizabeth wakes up and she's horribly deformed. She's nearly hairless and she's a withered hunchback. She's a wreck of a woman. She looks like she's probably 90, 100 years old at this point. Sue's gone ham. Elizabeth is obviously desperate to prevent Sue from further damaging her body, so she phones the supplier and they agree to send her the termination fluid to terminate Sue. She collects it, and as she begins injecting Sue, her mind is racing. She's still craving the fame and the notoriety and the lifestyle, so she stops. But this causes Sue's body to return to consciousness too, which means now they're both awake. This also disrupts that symbiotic balance and they're both left staring at each other, wondering what's going on. Sue very quickly figures out that Elizabeth was trying to kill her, and she flies into a fit of rage. She brutally beats Elizabeth. She's smashing Elizabeth around the flat from room to room. I didn't think this woman could take much more watching this in the cinema. I have no idea how Elizabeth held on for so long, but Sue does eventually end Elizabeth by smashing her face into a mirror, stomping, kicking on her, and then leaving to go to her New Year's event as Sue. What Sue doesn't know is without that live host, her body is going to rapidly begin to deteriorate. At the live event, she is dressed up, she's beautiful in the most fine jewellery and dress and makeup, she's gorgeous. But something's not right, so she goes to the bathroom and very easily pulls out one of her teeth. And then another, and then another. Sue decides she needs to find a cure for this. So she leaves, she gets in the elevator, presses the button, and as she does, one of her fingernails pops off too. On the ride down, even one of her ears falls off. She's literally falling to pieces trying to get back to her flat. When she returns home, she finds the activator fluid. Do you remember the one I said about at the start? The single-use fluid? There was a bit left. So she wants to make another version of herself. A better version of herself. So she uses it. And we have a very similar scene in front of us of another version of her coming to life. You see from her point of view, her looking around the bathroom, she sees the younger Sue on the floor, and then she looks in the mirror. What she's done is inadvertently create a grotesque, monstrous version of herself, which we're going to call Eliza Sue. She's almost a hybrid between Elizabeth and Sue, but she doesn't look like a person. She looks like a mass of flesh with body parts sticking out at weird angles. There's a face in her back. She is truly monstrous. Realising her mistake and realising there's going to be no way to fix this, she knows she needs to get back to the event. So she takes a photograph of Elizabeth from her apartment, cuts the face out and staples the picture of her own face to the monster version of her face, and she goes back to the studio. As she gets to the studio, she's hallucinating corridors of people chanting her name, telling her how beautiful she looks, and then she gets to the stage and they're all waiting for her. She's meant to already be there, and the audience is watching as she lumbers slowly onto the stage, dragging her limbs, wheezing, making the most foul noises. She gets to the microphone and tries to speak, but she physically can't form words. That's how messed up she is. And then her mask falls off in front of everyone. They are left aghast as she stands there waiting, and then she begins to retch. She hacks, and I guess vomits up, a breast with an umbilical cord. It looks like the world's fleshiest, saddest balloon as it splurts onto the stage. It's disgusting. The audience is obviously horrified and erupts into a violent chaos. She manages to lose an arm somewhere in the mix, and she is spinning, spraying the audience with blood and viscera, and it's a disgusting, foul scene. A man then comes up and decapitates Eliza Sue in front of everyone. Everyone is screaming. But the most gross bit is yet to come, because she grows a new head, like Deadpool baby leg kind of style, just grows a new head. This freaks everyone out further, and the audience is absolute chaos. There's blood everywhere, people are being violent to each other. It's wild. What is left of Eliza Sue manages to escape the studio in a mess of blood and limbs and wheezing. As she's running, one of her legs bursts and she collapses onto the pavement, and as her body hits the pavement, her body also explodes. She's bursting like a balloon. Again, the viscera, the amount of blood and gore just spewing everywhere is obscene. What is left of her is a puddle of flesh with Elizabeth's face in the middle. It crawls up the Hollywood Walk of Fame until it reaches Elizabeth Sparkle's star. She then melts into the concrete, and her bloody remains are cleaned up by a floor scrubber the next morning. And that's the end of this film. Let's discuss some of the themes for this film. It's a horror sci-fi, which I think is pretty clear. The sci-fi elements come into play here in terms of the horror of what we're seeing, the body horror, and also just the absolute disassociation from reality. It's a satirical body horror, which there are a few elements of comedy in this, which I think every good horror needs to break the tension and to pull you back to the horrific moments. And I think the body horror in this film was just ridiculous, but I'll talk about that more in a minute. We also have elements and themes of greed and fame and pride, because obviously she'd had a long career, and due to factors beyond her control, this was all pulled away from her. The craving and the need to have those things back, that's the greed. She wanted to be young and famous forever, which obviously we all know isn't something anyone can do, apart from maybe Madonna. And we also have elements of ageism and feminism in this film, because obviously she lost her job due to her age, which is something that I think a lot of women will find over men. Men can be funny and good looking up, to their 60s, 70s, but as soon as a woman hits 40, she is past her prime. So I think this represents a lot of what media put forward about women and, the way feminism is treated, as opposed to how men are treated in the same regard. Talking about the script, I think we have a very minimal script for this film. Considering how long the film was, it ironically didn't have a huge amount of substance. It did more in imagery and audios than it did in terms of characters actually speaking and putting the story together that way. It was a very visually effective film. It did get the point across, and it didn't delve off topic. But saying that, considering how long this film is, it really did not feel like there was a massive amount of talking in this film that furthered the plot. Talking of the plot, it was a really interesting plot, I thought. I think the idea of eternal youth and fame has been touched on a lot in media over the years, so it's by no means a new concept. But the way this film tackled those themes was new. The topic of feminism and ageism in media is a really new take that I really enjoyed. Though, I've got to say, plot-wise, it did stop at a certain point for me. Again, which I'll touch on in a moment, but I think the film could have ended earlier than it did and maybe made more of a poignant point. Acting wise, I think the acting was good. The characters and their intentions were clear from the get-go. You believe she wants a fresh start and you're there with her on the ride, but you can see the greed from both sides of herself. You know, Sue, the younger one, wanting to stay young and make an impact in more modern day, but also Elizabeth wanting just to return to her roots. So you kind of feel for both versions of herself for most of the film. But I also don't think the characters were super deep. They were just both desperate for fame, and I think they were very vapid characters, to be completely honest with you. And again, for such a long film that could have gave these characters such big personalities that you really connected to, again, it was very superficial. But you know, that could just be part of what they were going for. Cinematography wise, I loved it. The visuals were so bright and vibrant and colourful. Her bathroom was very hospital-esque with the bright white lights. It was very luminescent, and that contrasts between the bright, vibrant, colourful situations for Sue and the dark, depressing, drab existence that Elizabeth had to suffer for every week she then had to live as herself, while she was literally rotting in her own body. And this film also had a fantastic use of audio and even ASMR, which again I'll touch on in a moment. But some of the audios for this film just really enhanced the scenes even further. So what you're maybe lacking in terms of the script and characters talking to each other, they're making up for by making you squeamish while you're watching. And I think this also adds to the deterioration of the plot and the characters as the film progresses. In terms of gore and body horror, this film does not disappoint. I saw this in the cinema and my friend told me that he'd read online that this is not a film you should really eat while you watch. But I'm a big horror fan and I can stomach things like the human centipede and eat my dinner while I watch it. So I didn't really heed this advice. And this film truly did put me off by food, unbelievably so. I went home and was due to have dinner and genuinely could not think about eating after this, especially the last 10-20 minutes of this film. It was so disgusting that I actually did struggle to eat. So do you know what? Applause to The Substance, because that's a really hard feat to tackle when it comes to me enjoying eating while I watch horror. The horror is so grisly and violent. It's at times repulsive and revolting to watch. I mean, they literally give birth through their backs, sew it up. The injections, they're not too bad to begin with, but I mean, just the very idea of having to puncture your spine every week. Oh, and then the little hole that she keeps using, it's so visually repulsive, it's fantastic. Now touching more on the ASMR of it, it's used frequently throughout this film to assist in repulsing the audience. The scene at the beginning where her producer fires her over lunch or dinner, he's eating a plate of shrimp or prawns, something crustacean-y, and the sound, the slurping, the sucking, the squelching, it makes your skin crawl. It's disgusting. Even down to the sounds of the cloning process, which give you those exact same kind of, oh, it's cringy and it makes your skin crawl, and it really heavily adds to the vibe of this film. And it's throughout, even when it comes to her ending Elizabeth, that scene has a lot of ASMR just all throughout. The sounds are so uniquely used in this film to add that layer of just filth. This film touches a lot on sexuality and feminism. It's a very raunchy film, actually. It's a huge take on feminism in Hollywood, showing how older women are just thrown away and then they will be replaced with the most youthful, pretty little women that they can find. You know, more sexually viable women. This is shown throughout because Sue is constantly sexualized throughout this. Bearing in mind she's an aerobics instructor, she is wearing like a leotard for most of her filming scenes. There's a lot of shots of the other side. She is objectified through the film, but that is the point, because they couldn't objectify Elizabeth because she was too old to be sexy. So when Sue came along and she's stunning and beautiful and has a fantastic body, that's all they show you of her. She's literally an object for these TV producers. Elizabeth is literally having to objectify herself in the most wild way to make herself stay relevant. And I think that's a very poignant point that this film makes. I don't want to just ignore, like, I really did like the way that they showed you very visually what it's like to be a woman in the industry. Is the plot believable? No, not at all. But the point of sci-fi is that it opens doors to fantasy, and the body horror was so believable while you were watching it, and it was filmed so well, it made me feel like gagging at certain times. So I really do think it was believable in its own right while you're watching it. Let's talk about some pros and cons. Pro-wise, obviously the horror, gore, and the body horror was gruesome and fantastic. And the vibrancy was alluring and held my interest throughout the film, and obviously it is a long film, so that's good. You want to have your interest kept for the entirety of the film. But moving on to the cons, which I have more of. It was slack on the plot. I got the plot, and what little plot there was poignant, but for such a long film, it didn't, again, have a massive amount of substance in my opinion. It also went on for way too long. It's 2 hours 20, folks. And I honestly think it could have been capped at an hour and a half. Realistically, I actually think the film should have ended after Sue injects herself for the second time, and when she wakes up as Eliza Sue and sees herself in the mirror for the first time, that's where I think the film should have ended. I think that whole bloody mess of a final 20-30 minutes of the film was so unnecessary. Yes, it was gory, and I love gore, but there was no point to it. She'd already ruined her life. She'd already woken up as this monstrosity. We didn't need to watch her get decapitated by an audience who turn on her. We get it. We get the point of this film already, and I genuinely think they only put all of that in for shock value, whereas actually the film would have been perfectly shocking in what it gave up until that point anyway. It just felt like gore for the sake of gore, just to gross out the audience. And don't get me wrong, I love to be grossed out as a horror fan. It takes a lot. But this was borderline snuff. One last con for this as well. I don't think the trailer gave enough away. I talked to people at work about this film who'd heard bits about it but didn't bother to go and see it for themselves because the trailer made it look boring, because the trailer didn't show you any of the gross stuff from the film, which I guess to a certain extent you can't show all the visceral gore and guts of it. But just give a little more away or people aren't going to go and see it. I've had to tell people to go and watch it because it is worth watching. But yes, that's my last con. Some similar films. The body horror obviously reminds me of most David Cronenberg films. For example, films like The Fly from 1986, as well as Videodrome from 1983. The cloning, as well as the more artsy horror elements of this film, really remind me of Infinity Pool from 2023, which is another little gem. But I think for some weird reason, those two kind of fall into a very similar category for me. And then the dire need of fame really reminds me of the X franchise. You know, your X, Pearl and Maxine really just kind of hammers home that need to be famous. Let's talk about some ratings. This film has been really positively praised from critics and audience alike. Rotten Tomatoes gave this a 9 out of 10 and the audience gave it a 7 out of 10, which, you know, for Rotten Tomatoes is actually really high. I know I have my problems with the film, but it's not a bad film. It is just too long. It just goes on for too long. It was an interesting concept. It was really artfully done, and I think it did touch on some good points. The acting was great. I can't give it a bad score just because there's a few things I don't like. So I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. And I mean, I really do recommend you guys go and watch this for yourself. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. It was worth watching, definitely, and I will definitely be rewatching it when it starts coming out on streaming services. From that point of view, I think it's definitely very watchable. So I'd encourage you to go and watch it for yourself, but just heed my warnings, because I've got a thick stomach and this turned my stomach big time. So just be prepared for some very visually appalling scenes. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I've really enjoyed covering this one for you. I think it touches on a lot of stuff that I'm a big fan of, and I think it was just a lovely little disgusting gem of a film. So if you like this video, please give it a like. Let me know what you think. If you've seen it, leave me a comment and tell me what you thought of the film, whether you enjoyed it or didn't. And if you haven't seen it, go and watch it and come back and tell me what you think, because I'm super interested to know what your opinion is on this film. But yeah, please like, comment and subscribe for more, because I've got so many more fun films to talk about with you guys, and I literally can't wait for us to do this again soon. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye.